Breaking news, the ACLJ sues a Virginia county over church discrimination. The pastor joins us to discuss.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Seculo. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jordan Seculo.
Hey, welcome to Seculo. A lot to talk about today. We mentioned this case last week, but we are suing today, filing the lawsuit in the Eastern District of Virginia against Prince William County on behalf of Alive Church. This is the church that was told if you want to utilize your property at all, especially during the pandemic. So they bought a property. They hadn't yet built on the property, but to utilize the property for outdoor services, gatherings, because the school that they were meeting in also had closed down. So they weren't having outside groups in. They weren't having students in. So they were just looking for a place to gather. And they were told by the county, well, you can gather if you get a liquor license. That's the only way, is that you'll have to, again, pay a tax, pay a licensing fee, which, again, the county knows a church is not subject to any taxes. It doesn't pay taxes. We've seen this in Northern Virginia. Often they have a hostility. It's a very expensive, it's very well-to-do county in Northern Virginia, right outside D.C. The property's expensive, and the city would much rather, if they had their choosing, have on these properties tax revenue. You know, whether it was a personal home or a commercial business where they can get revenue from. So they've got this hostility towards churches, not seeing what the churches provide to a community, why they get that tax benefit.
Yeah, and in this particular case, we talked about this the other day, but I think it's worth reiterating. The church was put in a very awkward situation. They were told basically if you get a liquor license, you can operate. Now, you've got all these other activities going on there on this area of Prince William County, you know, venues, distilleries, wine orchards where they have events. So the church function of events and things like that, the county, you know, so we're not a problem with that. But to qualify as the same as any of these other enterprises, you have to obtain an ABC license, which is the liquor license for the state of Virginia. That's how Virginia regulates the sale of alcoholic beverages. The problem with that, of course, is it violates the church conscience, but it also treats the church in a uniquely different way. And that, Professor Hutchinson, the Constitution does not allow.
Absolutely. So in this particular case, the Alive Church is suggesting that there is a violation of their First Amendment rights, substantively and as applied by the county. And I think they are precisely on point here. I think it is clear beyond question that if you look at the documentation supplied by the county, if you look at the letter that they sent, they said you can indeed operate, but you simply cannot operate as a church. That, in my judgment, violates the United States Constitution.
The pastor will be joining us in the next segment of the broadcast, Alan Perdue. If you're watching, he'll be joining by Skype, so you'll be able to see the pastor, but of course you'll hear him if you're listening on the radio broadcast as well. So unique to hear from the client and their experience with the county and how they were connected with the ACLJ. We were talking to our client here. We realized this would be great to have on the broadcast. So that's coming up when we come back. We've also got a former Secretary of State, our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He'll be joining us second half hour of the broadcast. We'll be switching gears a little bit, talking about what's going on with the Wuhan Lab League, as well as COVID issues at the southern border, as we're starting to see those cases again. The numbers are pretty big when it comes to COVID, and people are trying to figure out the fall, back to school. So we'll talk about that with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. But when we come back, our client in the case, Alive Church, Pastor Alan Perdue will be joining us live on the broadcast with us to discuss the case. And I encourage you, go to aclj.org. You'll be able to see what we have filed here in the case, the complaint, and what we are seeking for this church. It is insane what this county has done to the church, or proposed that the church do. As always, check out aclj.org. If you're watching on Facebook, Periscope, Instagram, YouTube, share this with your friends and family. We'll be right back with our client, Alive Church, and their pastor, Alan Perdue. a county in Northern Virginia blocking our client, a live church, from worshiping and functioning, being able to utilize the land that they purchased, because the church, get this, cannot get an ABC license.
The letter says if you get a liquor license, an ABC permit, that's what they do in Virginia. If you get a liquor license, then in fact you can utilize the facility. But if you don't get a liquor license, you can't.
Even if a church was part of a denomination that there is not a strong anti-alcohol stance, for example, some Roman Catholic churches or Episcopal churches, even if that were the case, the state cannot force a church to pay for a permit for alcohol, which is another form of a tax, in order to function as a church.
We're going to federal court because this is what the county is saying. If the client would get the ABC license, the county would let the church operate like a, ready for this? Not like a church, but like a brewery or winery.
What is missing in this particular case is respect for the First Amendment.
Yes.
What is missing is respect for the free exercise clause.
The power to tax here is the power to control. And the power to control the church and its message. That's what you have to be concerned with.
They, again, want to take the tax exemption from this church and tax the church. So it's a creative way for, they thought in Prince George's County, to go after a church and still get revenue.
This is not about alcohol. It's not about our liquor license. It's about freedom of religion and the special status that churches have under the law.
They do so much for the community at no cost to the community, just like the work that we do at the ACLJ. We're a nonprofit, tax-exempt organization because we can represent the tax-exempt church in their legal battle at no cost to the church. Welcome back to Secular. This is unique because oftentimes we will bring cases where we have the clients will come on after the case and we'll discuss it if it's been resolved. But in this case, we wanted to bring the client on when we filed the lawsuit, which we are filing today in the Eastern District of Virginia. That's in federal court. The pastor, Alan Purdue, the church, a live church in, again, this is in Prince William County, Virginia. We've talked about some of their story before, but there is more to it. That's why we wanted to have Pastor Alan join us today.
Pastor, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it, and we appreciate you taking time to be with us, but also appreciate the stand your church is taking. We've talked about this case a couple of times, but it bears repeating here that you were trying to serve the community. This was the history of this is fascinating. Talk a little bit about what led the church to this property to begin with.
Absolutely, Jay. If I could, I just want to quickly say thank you to Mr. Ben Sisney. How our paths crossed was a God thing. And Jay, to you and the ACLJ.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Since the beginning of my ministry, you have been with us. You gave us the roadmap for how to get into schools, giving students the Bill of Rights to do Bible clubs in their local schools. Jay, thank you and the ACLJ for all you do. Thank you for taking on this important case. Jay, it really began because we are very active in our community. I'm very active in our business community and the business associations of our area who meet just in general for meetings and getting together in wineries. And we have these business meetings there. And we left, and our board and our leaders here said, man, you go to these wineries and they have these really nice buildings, but they're parking on gravel or they're parking on the grass. And we simply went to the zoning administrator and said, why can't we do that? You've removed all the red tape for them, but for churches, you put up in place this huge amount of red tape, this special use permit, by the way, which we have. And we said, can we just build a venue like that? And when I asked the question, she looked right in my eye and said, go get your ABC license. And it was like, wow, we're a church.
Yeah, I mean, so for people to understand, and first of all, I appreciate I didn't mean to cut you off earlier. I appreciate what you were saying, but I think the Ben Sisney story is also interesting on how this is how it works. This is how God does these things. This is how the ACLJ works. Ben was, if my understanding is correct, was attending? You met at a...
Yeah, Ben, he and his family just moved to the area, and they showed up to find a church, and they showed up to a live church and told me that he worked for the ACLJ.
Isn't that great? It's just, I love hearing those stories, and I certainly am thrilled that all those years ago you were able to utilize our resources, and here we are again, and I'm glad we're able to provide these for you now. Let me ask you a question on this. You mentioned, so for people to understand, the church had the right to meet constitutionally and statutorily with this under the same terms and conditions as anybody else. You cannot put the church in a situation where they are being treated unequally. That violates the Constitution. You did obtain a special use permit, so you were permitted to proceed. Explain that.
So we purchased the property with a special use permit that we have spent literally over $100,000 to do engineering and do everything they've asked of us to do. We have permission to build the church campus under that special use permit. But what we were seeking to do, because of the COVID shutdown, because we were displaced from our Prince William County school partner, whom we love, whom we appreciate, and we appreciate their partnership, we as a church were displaced. And when the governor allowed, with certain guidelines, to reopen again in May for those ready to rejoin worshiping in public, we said to ourselves, man, could we just build one of these farm-like structures that wineries and breweries are building, because it's completely void of the red tape. There's no red tape for them. And so we just wanted the same privilege. Could we build a venue and worship there, serve the community from there, and do so without having to be displaced and without having to pay a rent or pay someone else's mortgage? And so we were following the path for the special use permit, but we really felt like we were not being allowed access to cut through the red tape for an earlier structure to go ahead and get on our property.
You know, it's interesting, Pastor, as we're talking about Pastor Alan Perdue. This is the church we represent, a live church, and the new lawsuit we're filing today on behalf of the church versus Prince William County. You know, it seems like this is we've seen this happen time and time again in Northern Virginia. It's expensive property. They want the revenue. They want tax revenue, and they kind of don't see the benefit of the churches and what they provide to the community and to civil society, and to just the, as you were talking about, being out in the business community, the outreach that you do, all these different things. And it's not so much, it's not the school administrators. They were shut down. I understand that. They didn't have anything to decide there. But these county attorneys to come back to you, and then planning boards to say, you've got to be, you want to build something like that structure, go get a liquor license. It's finding any way possible to get tax, it's like a tax revenue from you, even though you should be completely tax exempt. And I think there was a time you even thought about, okay, maybe we have to do this because we need to operate for our community.
Yeah, Jordan, we said, I mean, we're partners in our community, in our county here, and we appreciate the work that they've tried to do to help us. And we did say to ourselves, could we grow apple trees and just make apple cider that's non-alcoholic, which still happened to be governed by the ABC license? However, the optic of that really did not align with our deep core values. And no church should be asked to get a liquor license. It's not a good optic for any church. And so we did for a moment consider it. And then in talking to our district and our leadership, we said, no, we really don't think we should have to do that. And I think, Jordan, it's important to note that a live church and our board and our district gave us some grant money to help. We spent over $20,000 locally to keep it here in the family, working with a very good local land use attorney and the county attorney. And we spent the money to convince them of the RUPALA issue and what we felt was a good RUPALA argument. And the response that our attorneys got from the county attorney was, you know, notwithstanding whether or not this long 13-page letter you wrote with RUPALA and state statute in it, notwithstanding whether or not you're correct or we're correct, we're not going to change our mind or rewrite anything to your benefit unless compelled to do so by a higher court. And so we're here because it was the only recourse the county gave us.
The statute that you're referring to, the Religious Land Use Protection Act, was designed to prevent exactly this situation. That's the irony of this. We've alleged in the complaint that the church meets all the requirements and has all the necessary approvals to be treated by the county as a bona fide agricultural use, similar to the farm wineries or breweries, to conduct agritourism, as they call it. It meets all the requirements, but for its sincerely held religious beliefs, which meant they did not want to obtain a liquor license, Harry. That's exactly what the Religious Land Use Protection Act is all about.
Absolutely. So this case is directly on point. I'm very happy that we have filed this lawsuit today in order to vindicate the rights of the Alive Church within the meaning of the United States Constitution. On the other hand, Prince William County has engaged in outrageous decision-making. In essence, the Alive Church, which has a special use permit, is being prevented from using the property that it owns within the meaning of the law. Why? Because the county says you need to get a liquor license. So in essence, the church is being forced to confront a Hobbesian choice. Either we become basically an alcohol establishment, or we can operate as a church, but with an alcohol license, or we have to shut down. This is outrageous.
It is so absurd when you think. Wes, really quick, and Pastor, we're going to keep you for the next segment of the broadcast. Wes, you're of course not only retired colonel from the United States Army, but you're also a pastor or chaplain. Putting the church in this situation it's really absurd.
It is absolutely insane. And if you didn't really realize it was actually happening, you would think someone made this up. And Alan, it's so good to have you on the show today. I'm not a member of your denomination, but I did go to Trevecca Nazarene University for my bachelor's degree, so we probably know some of the same people. My understanding, though, is that you actually rented a winery, brewery for your services for a while when the school closed down. And I think it's true that if a winery or a brewery, they can rent to a church, and the church can actually worship there, so they can do the activity that's not allowed on your own property if you'll rent it from a winery. Is that true?
Yeah, it's just so ironic. That's absolutely correct. They can do weddings, which 90% of the time are religious events. We as a church have utilized agricultural and winery type structures in the pandemic to continue functioning in those early months. And for them to be able to operate and worship and do what they do and host churches who worship, and that we could not do that on a regular every week basis on our own property. It's mind blowing.
It really is. Pastor, we've only got 40 seconds left, so we're going to stay with us. We're going to join us for the next segment. Fascinating case. That lawsuit about to be filed really any minute now.
That's right. It'll be filed in the Eastern District of Virginia. That's in federal court. The pastor, Alan Perdue, joining us on the broadcast today. Support the work of the ACLJ, aclj.org. But I encourage you, you'll be able to see this, too, on our website later today. We'll have this up so you can see what we filed in Prince William County in the Eastern District of Virginia. Also, if you got questions, comments, and you want to get it on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, we have our team watching that, monitoring that. We can get some of those in as well. We'll be right back on Secular.
In my time in service, both as the CI director and as Secretary of State, I watched the good work that the ACLJ was doing here in the States and all across the world.
The ACLJ's work at the UN, overseas with the European Court of Justice, is incredibly important.
We have on our team lawyers, non-lawyers as well, that are policy experts. They're all engaged in foreign policy issues.
We have been focused on protecting the nation state of Israel, particularly before the United Nations.
We don't shy away from the battles that are going on at the UN and just complain about them. We actually try to go in and do something positive and actually affect change.
The risk of an incomplete or unsolid relationship within the United States of America and Israel is real.
Israel is very important to the ACLJ, and we will always fight for Israel's rights.
We had a series of cases at the European Court of Human Rights, primarily dealing with religious liberty.
And as Secretary of State, I saw this too. Nations that had more religious freedom were on firmer footing. They had better democracies.
America has always been the world leader in religious liberties, in freedom of conscience and freedom of speech.
We've taken the First Amendment, and that has been our cornerstone. It's to defend the rights of people of faith and others that are having their rights abused.
We not only hold our government accountable, but we hold other governments accountable.
You have to keep the battle going when it's not cool anymore, when it's not the number one story on TV. You have to actually be committed to fighting it out, or else you'll never win.
The ACLJ's front and center on this, whether it is going after the deep state, whether it is litigation that we're engaged in. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. Go to aclj.org today. That's aclj.org.
All right, welcome back to Secular. Frank Maiden, Senior Counsel with the ACLJ, continues to join us as well. I just want to put this into kind of the larger context as well. A reminder to everybody in this first half hour of the broadcast that if you are someone in a situation like this, the ACLJ is there for you. As we had on yesterday, a pastor joined us live from a live church, Pastor Purdue, that we're representing in a land use matter. And the church there, and we're able to represent them at no cost to the church. If you are someone in a situation like this nurse was, we are there for you. You go to aclj.org/help. Or if you go right onto the homepage, you'll see it right on the top of the homepage as well. And there's a little contact form you fill out, name, information, a little bit about your situation, so that we can get the right attorney to the right person to contact you to decide what the right course of action is to protect your rights. That is there. It is the best way for us to know if your rights are being violated, if you need representation. So go to, again, it's aclj.org/help. Remember that if you're in one of these situations, if you work in one of these environments where these kind of decisions, so if you're, the medical world, the nursing world, are commonplace. Now, Than, I know you mentioned in the chat, there are a good friend of ours, Senator Langford, is going to put forward legislation to try and privatize this right of action. I don't want to get too into the details there, but basically make it clear-cut and available that people still could, on their own, file a lawsuit.
Yeah, Frank has talked about the ability to bring a lawsuit on the part of individuals in cases like this one. Jordan, Senator Langford has put forward a bill that he calls the Conscience Protection Act. It looks like it's got about 25 in that range co-sponsors in the United States Senate. It would explicitly say in violations of this kind of case, in violations of the Church Amendment, that series of conscience protections, there would be a private right of action. So the nurse in this case could bring the suit on her own. She wouldn't have to depend on making a complaint to the Department of Health and Human Services and then having it referred to the Department of Justice for a lawsuit. So while there are existing options on the table, Jordan, this piece of legislation would explicitly say that there is a private right of action. And as I look at this case, I think we've moved past a time where we can depend on the political branch to enforce these laws, because we warned about this, Jordan. We knew it was coming. We knew they would drop it. I think it's time to give individuals an opportunity to pursue it on their own.
Frank, I think what is unique here is that we are seeing a bigger picture where we have this major case at the Supreme Court out of Mississippi. This fall, we filed 3 separate briefs in that matter. The issue of life and the protection of the unborn is going to probably get more attention than it's gotten in maybe a decade or more, maybe longer than that, because of this case that is a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade. So we're starting to see the pro-abortion side of this, the Javier Becerra's, the Biden administration. They are becoming more and more radical, more and more, yes, defensive, but also taking offensive steps to try and protect the abortion industry.
I think you're right, Jordan, and that's what frightens me about what they've done here. Everyone reads the headlines this week. Department of Justice drops case that they filed on behalf of a pro-life nurse in Vermont. How many human resource managers in hospitals across the country just read the headline or just read the very superficial account of what they did underneath the headline and think, oh, okay, it's okay to do that now. They're not aware of the other laws that are on the books. They're not aware of the details of what happened here. And that's what concerns me, particularly with the radicalization of the abortion forces that we've seen, who now are in the highest places in the government, because you're absolutely right about that. They are on the defensive. They're frightened of what the Supreme Court's going to do with the Mississippi case. And it seems to me that is leading them to do exactly what you're talking about, which is take extreme measures against individual pro-lifers based on hostility. I also want to say something about what Dan was talking about. Senator Langford's bill is exactly what we've been looking for 20 years. You know, this church amendment and similar federal laws are on the books, but they lack this private right of action. If there were a private right of action under the church amendment, we would have filed dozens more lawsuits than the ones we've filed over the years. Because the church amendment, quite frankly, is stronger than the generic Civil Rights Act of 1964, which we then litigate under. So, yes, Senator Langford's bill is right on point. I've read it. It fills the need that we've been looking for decades. Whether it gets passed or not, I understand the politics of all that, but that's something that we need to get behind.
Well, listen, we have seen, and Frank, thanks for joining us these both segments of the broadcast, because we've seen how an administration can radically change this for good, for ill. We only got a brief time with it for good, but we saw you could create this new division within the Health and Human Services to protect the civil rights, which would include conscience rights of the American workers when they are in the workplace, to have these conscience protections. And we have seen, again, that you can put that in place. The DOJ can take action on behalf of those individuals if they file a complaint, so they don't have to go through the normal litigation process. But you see that when a hostile administration comes in, who isn't even looking at it as the individual's right. I mean, Wes, to me, that's what is even can be the most upsetting is that they put abortion, they put the politics of it ahead of the protecting the individual American who, by law, has this conscience protection. And, you know, if it was someone saying, I don't want to be, you know, I'm against the draft, I'm against the war, they have conscience protection. We allow these conscientious objectors. We always have in our country. And I feel like Javier Becerra would be standing beside them.
Oh, absolutely.
But when it came to the pro-life nurse, that same kind of objection, which we're not supposed to get into and analyze why and how, because that's what the courts have said, they say they side with the big industry or the big hospital over the individual.
Yeah. And this case in Vermont, as we know, is not an isolated case. When we've been talking about this for the last several years, I mentioned the fact that my wife, who is a surgery nurse, had the same thing happen to her where she's forced into a situation. You can't leave a patient there in the operating room, and they tell you after you're already gowned and gloved, this is an abortion, and you can't leave for the safety of the patient itself. This happens more than people know. And Jordan, there is a legal and a moral issue that are tied to this. The moral issue, of course, the obvious one is abortion itself, but there's also the moral issue that this individual nurse in this particular case, that her rights also were legally transgressed on, but that is not just a legal issue. That is a moral issue too, and there needs to be recourse, there needs to be right of action to protect people like this, because the legal issue and the morality of this abortion and of forcing people to perform abortions are inseparably connected.
Yeah, Harry, when I look at this, I see, you know, we had the right motions put in place, but I think what Frank said is important is that you don't give up in these because the government didn't enforce the right. I mean, we still have all these legal options available to us. It's just important that people speak out because, as Frank said, what the headline will be is that if you manage one of these hospitals, well, it doesn't matter if this person speaks out. But we can take this to court. We can represent these people.
You're absolutely correct, and you're absolutely correct to emphasize the rights that we still enjoy, notwithstanding the spineless decision by the Biden administration, which essentially has declared deer hunting season on religious folks.
All right, folks, we come back, second half hour coming up. We're going to get it more into the infrastructure issue or what's going on in Capitol Hill with that legislation. It's back and forth consistently. Go to ACLJ.org, that new blog up on this, our client out of Vermont in this pro-life case. We're going to continue fighting. Support the work of the ACLJ at aclj.org. We'll be right back.
keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Seculo. And now your host, Jordan Seculo.
Welcome back to Seculo, folks. Again, we're going to continue fighting. There might be, again, a full-on declaration of war against the pro-life individual in America by the Department of Justice, by the Biden administration, by the Health and Human Services. We knew that was coming. It was how the vehicles that they were going to utilize we are paying close attention to. But reminding you, I think Frank said it best when he said, at the ACLJ, we have never relied on the federal government to protect our rights under the law, especially when it comes to those individuals who are pro-life, or when it has gone to the pro-life movement, fighting back against the abortion industry. You haven't relied on the government. And so while the Trump administration was putting in place a great new way to give teeth to the laws that are on the books and make it easier, the laws are still there. The protections are still there. But we have to be the ones to fight. We cannot rely on the government to fight for us. But we never have at the American Center for Law and Justice. Of course, you have a friendly administration. You help, you assist, you put in place, you help with policies. That was being done. But under the Biden administration, it was just a matter of time until they got a handle on what was going on and they tried to shut it down. That doesn't shut down our work at the ACLJ. It doesn't take away your rights under the law. Remember that. Now, I want to turn to something and go to Stan Bennett in Washington, D.C., because, Stan, there is a lot of talk. If you cut through some of the other stories in the news, the one that I think will affect most Americans is this infrastructure talk and kind of putting in place the idea that I think most Americans would be okay with, even the $900 billion kind of the huge infrastructure bill. Maybe it ends up a little more, a little bit less. But that is not the full story, and it's becoming more and more partisan. So we're starting to see any kind of bipartisan work. It feels like it was already difficult to start with to get anything done bipartisan, and this now has become extremely politicized.
Yeah, as usual, Jordan. I mean, the devil is always in the details. We've said on this broadcast that we thought there was a bipartisan infrastructure deal to be had if they focused really on a targeted level on roads and bridges and waterways, broadband, those kinds of things. Jordan, there has been a bipartisan group of senators trying to get a deal like that, and about a week ago, they announced again that they had a deal. It was a $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure deal. We got the legislative text just a couple of days ago, about 2,700 pages, Jordan. So again, not the best way to run this process. Senators still going through the piece of legislation, finding things that, quite frankly, should not be in there. But here's the bottom line. I would tell you that is a process that could have gotten us to a place that we were talking about, where it was a true infrastructure bill, that it was targeted, that it wasn't $3.5 trillion like Joe Biden was asking for, but really focused on infrastructure. Jordan, I think we could get to a place on that bill where it would pass on a bipartisan basis. But now Democrats in Washington, D.C., I would say led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, have said they are going to block that bill, no matter how it ends up, Jordan, unless it's attached to the $3.5 trillion wish list that they have through the reconciliation process. So look, from where I sit, Jordan, even though a reasonable infrastructure bill might be a good thing, I think Senate Republicans have to look at this and realize that what they're really voting on at the end of this week, if they ever get to the end of this process, is a $5 trillion bill, $3.5 trillion of which they won't get any say in. Jordan, I hope if that's how this plays out, they don't take that bait.
All right, folks, we come back. We'll get into this further. We'll continue to talk about, because there's this kind of holdup by AOC and others, and to talk about, do they really have the power to hold this up or to put all these provisions in? And right now it is stalling on Capitol Hill, so we will see how this moves forward. But there's still reportedly would be enough Republican senators. I'm not going to name names because this was kind of an older report after this has all happened. Are they still there? Are they going to, be willing to go down this road knowing what's coming? That's what we'll talk about when we come back. Always remind you to check out aclj.org to see all the work that we're doing. We'll be right back on Secular.
Joining us now to talk about foreign policy now and in the future, the Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo.
This is a different day and age, a different United States of America foreign policy.
Well, Mike Pompeo said the policies of the previous administration really brought havoc to the region.
Joining me right now with his reaction and the state of affairs right now between the U.S. and China is U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
China's entry into Iran will destabilize the Middle East. It'll put Israel at risk. What we've attempted to do is make clear to China, if you want to participate on the world stage, you can't engage in behavior like this.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is urging Turkey to release detained American pastor Andrew Brunson.
This morning, Pastor Andrew Brunson, who was in prison in Turkey for nearly 2 years, has been let out of jail. The ACLJ was at the very center of making the world aware of the plight of Pastor Brunson. They raised awareness of this, and then the administration took this very seriously. In my time in service, both as the CIA Director and as Secretary of State, I watched the good work that the ACLJ was doing here in the States and all across the world.
This is a moment in the history of the American Center for Law and Justice. Secretary Pompeo has had an incredible career already, serving in Congress, was the director of the CIA, and of course, most recently, the Secretary of State for the United States of America.
The work that we do with this current administration will save lives and protect America and keep us free and safe and strong.
Well, I'm very happy to announce that former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is now a senior counsel for global affairs for the American Center for Law and Justice.
The ACLJ today is needed now more than ever, and it's why I am so thrilled to be a part of this really important organization.
We talk about these kind of different issues facing our country. One that is kind of fueling it all together. It all comes together in the rise of violent crime. It, as I explained, it happens whether you are in a smaller city or a major city. The numbers that you might have been, normal for your city to have to deal with have spiked. They are out of control. And so we're seeing just outrageous acts of crime, people just walking out of stores and saying, well, don't even try to stop them because it's not worth trying to stop them, or the massive amount of homelessness in our country that leads to crime, leads to drugs, it leads to so many issues. The border crisis, the pandemic issues, people not going back to work or losing their work, and not so that leads to the homelessness issue. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, a senior counsel for global affairs at the ACLJ, has got a new piece up going at aclj.org this afternoon. It's called "We Can No Longer Ignore Rising Crime in America." Secretary Pompeo, thanks for joining us. We know that this is not a normal summer spike, as the administration may try to spin it. This is something that we've seen over the last year and a half as people are dealing with the pandemic, the defund the police movements. It's starting to show what those policies mean when you don't support policing in communities and you allow your border to go out of control and people aren't back to work.
Jordan, you did a very nice job there connecting all the various strains that have led to this increase in violence. It is not a summer spike. This is going to continue to be a problem, and you're right, not just in our biggest cities, but I was in my home state of Kansas now just a few weeks back talking to some of the senior police officers. They can't get people to sign up. People are retiring. Their recruitment classes are smaller. When you denigrate the very people who are charged with keeping public safety, protecting each and every one of us in our homes, you drive this up. You will find fewer people willing to take the risk to actually do the hard work to defend and secure freedom all across America when you denigrate these people. And then the second thing is you have to impose real costs. The administration is beginning to do things that feel like catch and release, right? No longer actually processing these claims against people who are conducting violent crime. This is happening all across America. It will put families at increased risk, and we can't allow this to continue to happen.
Mike, you point out in your piece that 25 major cities in the United States have already started their significant cuts or proposing major cuts in police budgets. I was in an area of North Carolina that is a beautiful area of the state of North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, where they had a lot of talk about cutting the police and dismantling the police, and crime has increased. across the country in these, and these are not major cities. These are tourist destinations. So this anti-police move that the left is pushing is having real consequences. And by the way, those consequences, Mike, are on Republicans, Democrats, independents, people not involved, citizens, people, non-citizens. If you're there, you could be subject to the violence.
Jay, you know this. It happens to me all the time. I have friends call me and say, Mike, I'm thinking about traveling to some city. It used to be they would call me, I'm traveling to some city around the world. Do you think it's safe to go there? They thought I might have some special insights. Now they're asking if I travel to New York or to Washington, D.C. or to North Carolina, wherever it may be, is it going to be safe? They're seeing the images on TV. We've seen this before in America. We've seen where the left has attacked those who are trying to defend and secure freedom, and we can't permit this to continue to happen. People, just like they're rising up about what's happening in our schools, they need to rise up. And, Jay, we always know this, too. The communities most adversely impacted are the communities with the least resources.
Right.
So we'll see highlighted pictures from a particularly nice place, but in the end, this violence and the drugs and the homelessness always come to attack the families who can least afford this violence. Those of us who are conservative, believe in property rights and the protection of liberty and life, we need to make sure that we are doing all the work we need to protect everyone and in all ways, even in those difficult communities.
These are the most vulnerable. You're right. The most vulnerable people in our society are often the victims of these, and it's tragic. And if the inner cities that have enough trouble as it is, this just seems to complicate it worse.
Well, it's almost like defund the police. The idea, and Secretary Pompeo, to some extent, those advocates of that, while they might not have actually, some places put this into practice, some didn't. But the idea what you were talking about is the idea that people don't want to take those positions anymore. It was already putting your life in jeopardy to protect your fellow citizens, but that we've now demonized that position. And so whether you actually defund the police or not, if the police had the money to hire but can't find people, it works the same way, because you have taken out a pool of people who say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with the regular crime, and also having no support from the city, the state, the community.
Yeah, Jordan, that's right. Look, your idea of connectedness is right. When you begin to say that the Second Amendment doesn't permit people to bear arms, when you defund the police, when you start attacking faith communities as well, who have always been in some of these most vulnerable populations, right? Their church, their place that their community gathers has always been a place of safety and haven. When you begin to undermine that and pull out these essential pins, you are systemically building the conditions for violence and crime. You're rewarding it. Young kids will see that this may be their only way to take care of themselves, is to join a gang or become part of a crime group. These are the things that create the conditions that are difficult to get back from. When we need mayors, county commissioners, city leaders all across America, even in these large urban places that have historically elected Democrats, to understand that the people are being harmed by this violence, and the idea that you're going to undermine law enforcement is cataclysmically dangerous for these most vulnerable populations.
Mike, we were talking earlier in the broadcast about the situation on the border, which is in record numbers of illegal immigration right now, and the number of encounters is breathtaking. But as you're talking about crime, this whole situation on the border does not help our crime situation in the United States. It hurts it.
Of course. And it's not just in Texas, Arizona, and California. You all have talked about this, and the ACLJ has done good work on this as well. But they are transporting these people all across America. They're dropping them into communities with which they are not familiar. And it's not just the virus that they may be carrying. They may have come from backgrounds where violence was the norm. And so the risk of increased crime is dramatic.
Yeah, I also, as we look at this, we try to look at not just here's the problem, but point to solutions. And you've run the CIA. You are Secretary of State. You've been a member of the United States Congress. I mean, you know solutions. As we look at the crime situation, and it's everything from the kind of the attitude going on politically. What do you think is the number one priority that needs to be put in place to curb this?
We need to make sure that our law enforcement officers are supported, and that our district attorneys, the prosecutors around this country, are empowered, and that we find the tools, the judicial and resources to make sure that these criminals aren't being released. They're not being returned to the streets. The recidivism rates have to go down, and we need to make sure that we are actually prosecuting these criminals to the full extent of the law, such that they are not permitted to prey on the most vulnerable.
Which goes back to basically the idea that the criminal justice system needs also to not only prevent crime, but be a deterrent from future crimes. Mike, it's really criminal justice 101.
It truly is. There's not an original thought here. By the way, we in America know how to do this. We've been in this place before, and Democrat administrations allowed our cities to run wild. We've been in this place before. We know how to get back from this. It is a deterrence model and a support model in these most vulnerable communities that can drive down crime and make sure that we are all protected.
I want people to listen to this. We just got this audio because Cori Bush, she's part of the squad, a congresswoman from Missouri. She's got a lot of security, but she supports defund the police. She's trying to explain away now. I'm not against anybody having security, members of Congress, elected officials, former federal officials, current. But at the same time, if you're calling for defund the police, that is kind of saying it's one thing for me and one thing for everybody else. Take a listen to how she tries to explain this away. Just happened.
I'm going to make sure I have security because I know I have had attempts on my life and I have too much work to do. There are too many people that need help right now for me to allow that. So if I end up spending $200,000, if I spend $10 more on it, you know what? I get to be here to do the work. So suck it up, and defunding the police has to happen. We need to defund the police and put that money into social safety nets.
Oh, okay. Mike, this is where I think we're living in the land of the absurd. I have no problem with her spending $200,000 or $300,000, whatever she needs to for security. You have security, we have security, we all have security if you're in a profile position. Okay, that's part of it. But to then tell the local cities and communities, Mike, they can't have security? Defund the police? Really?
Jay, I suppose she would suggest a social program to keep her safe. That would be the logical corollary to her statement. That's absurd. It's ridiculous. I hope the American people can hear that and understand that is hypocrisy at the highest order and, more importantly, dangerous.
Thank you, Secretary Pay. You've got the new pieces up at ACLJ.org. It'll be up this afternoon. We can no longer ignore rising crime in America. Just take it into effect. I mean, this is just happened, this statement. People are saying, well, what about all of your security? You're here, she's holding a protest outside the Capitol, has lots of security, has obviously spent a lot of her budget. I have no issue with that. Do not call at the same time to defund the police. You got to... Again, look at yourself. Why do you need that much security as a junior member of Congress, the House of Representatives? Maybe because there's not enough police. Maybe because you're calling for defunding the police. Again, the hypocrisy is just out of control. Be right back on Secular.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The report is coming out. It shows that not only did Tea Party groups get more scrutiny, but so did a host of other conservative groups.
It was something that no one could believe our government was even capable of doing, and now they were admitting it.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history. To take on the IRS and win... For the ACLJ, life has always been a top issue.
Barbara, I am here at this site because there are thousands of people and millions across America that say abortion's murder.
When you're fighting for the life of the unborn, you're on the right side of history, you're on the right side of law.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life to beat back the abortion juggernaut.
It's very important that we remain hopeful that the courts that the Trump administration was able to impact will give us good rulings that are based in law and sound reasoning.
This is one of the social issues we're winning.
There are historians that point out that religious persecution is at its highest level since the first 3 centuries when the Roman Empire led religious persecution.
A mid-state pastor's family is fighting to bring him home.
We are getting my husband after 7.5 months.
Turkey should not get away with holding my father one more day.
When Brunson was finally released, who meets him at the airport at 2:30 in the morning? Rick Grinnell.
I saw Pastor Brunson walk down the stairs of the plane. I was filled with emotion. I told him that we were praying for him. The American people never forgot about him.
I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world.
to Seculo. See on Facebook wrote in, they're weaponizing our federal law enforcement agencies against us. It reminds me of the IRS scandal targeting conservative states. Well, it is what's happening. So in red states, the DOJ, that's where the DOJ is going. They're not doing a review of the voting laws in the Northeast, even though those laws are more restrictive and usually don't have all these other options and ways to vote, and certainly not at the widespread level. They're tiny states that combine to make up, again, their strongholds, but they're not reviewing those rules. And again, I think if you look historically back at states that kind of do everything possible to make it fair for everyone in the state, it is states that were subject to, until recently, the Voting Rights Act review by the DOJ. Right. Georgia. These states have tried to do everything, but last time around, they got put in a bad position. There was a lot of bad decisions at the state level by Georgia by Republicans.
Yes, be clear.
So we're honest and clear. They wouldn't fight Stacey Abrams in court. They were afraid of her. And they were afraid of the claims she was making. So what happened? Chaos in the Georgia election. But that's because they said okay to that chaos. They welcomed in the chaos theory of, well, who's going to be who's gathering the ballots, who's putting this together. And again, I'll tell you, so it's worked a lot in politics. When you're at the base level of not being able to understand what the law is, throw your campaign apparatus out the window. It doesn't matter, because if it's not clear for people who have
that
been,
was the problem, the whole
how they should go about getting ballots to people. It was during a pandemic. I think we have to be prepared. Not that we're necessarily going to be dealing with COVID in the next major election cycle, in the midterms, but we might be, or something else. Who knows? So deal with it. Let's get ready as a country and let the states do what they think is best, so that people don't show up to vote.
Yeah, which, by the way, Republicans were saying, including Republicans that were, hurt the Georgia election. By the way, we're not talking about, was the election stolen? Was it, would have the outcome been different? We're talking about fundamental constitutional fairness. Now, I want to play, though, what the Attorney General Merrick Garland said about the lawsuit. And then I want to get Harry, Wes, Andy responding. Listen to what he said.
Our complaint alleges that recent changes to Georgia's election laws were enacted with the purpose of denying or abridging the right of black Georgians to vote on account of their race or color, in violation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
Now, that is a very serious allegation made against the state legislature, that they were basically engaging in Jim Crow. Now, looking at what the law actually did, you got to request a mail-in ballot, that the drop boxes are going to be monitored and going to be state official drop boxes, and the basic voter identification requirements. So I'm going to start with Harry. The Attorney General has said this is abridging the right of black Georgians to vote on account of their race. That is a fundamental charge of racism by the Georgia legislature.
Well, there is not a scintilla of evidence in support of Merrick Garland's claim. Indeed, in Georgia, it is easier for African Americans to vote than African Americans in Delaware and many other states. So in Georgia, they have expanded the hours for voting. They are allowing absentee voting. They are simply ensuring greater election integrity and election security. And African American voters, by and large, support what Georgia is doing, unlike what Merrick Garland is saying.
All right, Wes, you said earlier, and I think this is important for our audience to say, that when you do something like this, you cheapen the actual issues of racism that do exist within culture.
Oh, absolutely. I do not believe we are a racist nation, but like any nation, we're a nation that has races in it. And there are some racist policies out there in certain places. But to accuse the state of Georgia of racism or any other entity when there is no racism involved is an affront to the victims of true racism. I mean, it's an insult to them. And not only that, Jay, these accusations from Merrick Garland are an affront to anyone who is for free and fair elections. I encourage people to read the 98-page piece of legislation in Georgia. It really is not racist at all. There's not even a scintilla of racist stuff in it. It makes it easy to vote, hard to cheat. What Merrick Garland and his Department of Justice is doing, they're losing their integrity by attacking voter integrity.
Well, listen to what Vice President Harris had to say about voter identification.
Is agreeing to voter ID one of those compromises that you'd support? I don't think that we should underestimate what that could mean. Because in some people's mind, that means, well, you're going to have to Xerox or photocopy your ID to send it in to prove you are who you are. Well, there are a whole lot of people, especially people who live in rural communities, who don't, there's no Kinko's, there's no Office Max near them. People have to understand that when we're talking about voter ID laws, be clear about who you have in mind and what would be required of them to prove who they are. Of course, people have to prove who they are, but not in a way that makes it almost impossible for them to prove who they are.
Of course, people have to prove who they are, but not in a way that makes it almost impossible for them to prove who they are. Now, Andy, you've already addressed this, but we're talking about the state of Georgia will issue you an ID card. You could go to any county, city, local township and get it copied. Nobody's going to give you a problem. You don't have to own a Xerox machine. They even make, copy machines. This is absurd. It really is.
Jay, it really is. You could be in a county in rural South Georgia where I spent my professional career, and you could go to the county registrar's office in the county seat, and you can get a county or a state ID issued that would allow you to vote if you don't have a driver's license. You don't have to own a Xerox machine. You don't have to have a Kinko's nearby you. You don't have to have a massive reproduction facility in which you go in and get copies made. Vice President Harris is absolutely incorrect, as is Merrick Garland's statement, that this is a racist law. These are not racist laws. These are laws that are supported by most all of the citizenry who votes in the state of Georgia, and those statements are just plain false.
And the IDs are free, Jay. You don't even have to pay for them.
Yeah, there's no cost there. I just got notification from our senior counsel, Eric Zimmerman, that our brief has, in fact, Jordan, been filed.
Yeah, so there you go. We are, again, filing this at the district court level, which is not where we usually take this, where we represent the members of Congress. We usually start at the appellate court level. We believe this is so critical to get out ahead of this, that the trial court and what's going to be determined in the trial court phase of this is so critical, not just in Georgia, but to more than a dozen other states, red states predominantly, that are also in the DOJ's crosshairs. This is the first test. This is the test number one. Can we beat Georgia? If so, then we can take this around and we beat all these other states, and we're going to be back to the same place. But I want to go back to what Kamala Harris said, because I live in 2021. She is trying to talk like we don't live in a time where you can scan things on your phone. And by the way, the phones are free. So people are handing out phones, however you want to sign up for. And yes, there's people that are in tough economic situations or rural areas, but laws that's why you have the flexibility at the state level to figure out what's best for your state and the residents of your state, ones who live in the urban areas and ones who live in the rural areas. You get to determine because you actually live there and represent them at the state level, which is what our founding fathers intended, because that's how you figure out what's best. Whether or not it's a FedEx, Kinko's or not, she's talking about outdated things. Let's be honest. I'll be right back on Secular. They live in 2 decades ago. They love that. Talk to you tomorrow.